in my own work? What opinions or conclusions can I draw from what's being said? And basically, what's unique about this? What haven't I heard before? What can I do with this? So always be forming questions, asking the author, the writer, the presenter in your mind. You know, get your answers. You'll be very much listening well if you do that.
As Jane mentioned, as adults, there are three key ways that we take in information: visual, auditory, and physical. And I'd just like to ask you to consider for a moment how you best remember various events that happen. Let's say, for instance, that you're watching TV, or you're at the movies, or even reading a book. Do you, A, best remember what you see? Do you remember the scenes? Do you remember what people look like? Or B, do you remember the dialogue? Do you remember what people have to say? Do you remember people's names? Do you remember the jokes? Or C, do you remember what happened? Do you remember how the characters felt? Do you remember how you felt watching them or reading about them? You are all unique individuals, and you all have preferences. And this is what multisensory learning is all about, is to help you recognize the ones that you have and to embrace the others as well for true multi-chance, multi-sensory learning. Jane?
We've seen a lot of techniques so far and mentioned a lot of techniques that actually refer to each of the senses. The visual people will certainly find techniques like highlighting as you go through a textbook. Don't be afraid to highlight, because we've all been brought up to respect books, but basically they need to work for you, and you should be involved in what you're learning. Go through, highlight the text as you find new information, underline it. Those sort of things will be very helpful for the visual people. You can also use mental imagery and visualization to put yourself in a situation where you're using your learning. That's a very visual technique. You can watch demonstrations. You maybe need to see somebody doing something before it really makes sense to you. And also the mapping technique that we'll be showing you in a little while, like the maps that we're using here, would very much be a visual technique where you can see what we're talking about. For people who are more auditory, they don't need necessarily to take so many notes, because that's their way of learning. They take the information in an auditory style. And things like audio tapes, even reading into an audio tape themselves to help revise, that would certainly help. They appreciate the sound of the voice. You can use tone and even use crazy accents to make things stand out more when you're taping your own revision. Reading out loud is definitely helpful for somebody who's auditory, and obviously lectures are ideal for them. For the physical learners, they really need hands-on. They need to actually be doing things to make sense to them. So again, actually taking part in a demonstration or taking part in role play would certainly be an advantage for them.
What we're going to do now is actually show you how to read through a textbook in a very powerful way, so that you can absorb information and comprehend information even while taking it in at a pretty fast rate. Jane?
We're using the imaginary example of a 250-page book. You know, a lot of us get these books and we know we need to find the information, but in this day and age, it's where do you find the time to actually wade through, learn it, and get anything useful out of it. So we're going to look at, say, a 250-page book that's divided into 10 chapters. Now, using techniques that we've already spoken about in this stage of learning, we first of all get a big picture overview. And to do that, we look at the chapter heads, we look at the title and the author, we look at the chapter heads, we look at the index, so that we've got a general idea of what the whole book is about. We spend about 5 or 10 minutes just doing that. We then preview the first chapter. We spend about 3 minutes really going through, reading any subheadings and looking to see what information is in there. And basically at this point, you stop after the first chapter and you say, have I found anything of use? Because my time's precious. You know, if I haven't found anything in an overview and a preview, then am I going to find anything in the other 9 chapters? So you actually make a conscious decision there of whether the book is useful to you. and it's going to add to your knowledge. You don't have time to waste on things that are only what you already know. So you spend about 3 minutes a chapter if you've decided that the rest of the book is going to be useful for you. You can then sketch out in note form what you already know about each of the chapters, about the subject. That, again, about 3 minutes a chapter, 30 minutes for the book. And then ask the questions that we mentioned before over on the other board, the A, E, I, O, and U, assumptions, evidence, what illustrates this, what opinions are being drawn, and what is unique about it. Those questions will show you what you need to know about the text. Again, 3 minutes a chapter, 30 minutes for a book. Now we come on to speed reading. And yes, it's quite easy for all of us to actually achieve a speed of 10 to 15 seconds a page. And I encourage you to look at speed reading, because basically the way we've all been taught to read is to vocalize in our heads as we read the words. Now that means we stop on each word and we focus. It means that the brain, which works at far faster than that, gets bored, so it back skips, it wastes time, it wanders. If you teach yourself how to speed read, and you can achieve quite easily at least 2,000 words a minute, because your eyes work quite happily at that speed, scanning the pages, you will find the key words that you need to know about are there, and you will focus in on them. It actually stops the brain getting bored, so you're more effectively reading, and you can achieve this 15 to 20 seconds a page and really, get the information that you need without the wasting of time that the vocalization causes in the brain. 15 seconds a page, about 8 minutes for a chapter. That means you've spent about 80 minutes on the book. We then go on to step 6, which is the after view. Now, during your speed reading, there will have been sections that perhaps didn't quite gel as you went through. These are the more difficult ones, and we would recommend that you go back in this after view and actually read that paragraph out loud, because you're actually then hearing it as well as seeing it and saying it. We're adding more senses every time we do this. So difficult paragraphs, spend about 10 minutes a chapter doing this. We then make notes. You're actually turning what you've read, the information, you're converting it now into notes at 10 minutes a chapter, about 100 minutes. And then probably the most important thing when you're learning is a review cycle. What's the point of doing all this if you can't remember what you've actually read or learned? And for a review cycle, we would just recommend that you looked at these notes that you made here for 10 minutes the next day, for 10 minutes the next week, and for 10 minutes the next month. And that way you've revisited them and you've locked the information into your mind.
So here, in just 410 minutes, less than 7 hours, you've read an entire 250-page textbook. But you haven't just read it, you've reviewed it, you've re-reviewed it, you've made notes, but also you've fully understood and fully comprehended it. That's the power of power reading. Now, in terms of taking notes, there's another very important technique that we call learning maps. And we've actually already introduced you to learning maps, because that's exactly what this is here. It's a unique way of making information much more memorable. And we do have in the studio audience today somebody who has effectively used a learning map in his work relationships. I'd like to ask Jerry Cohen to come up and share with us his experiences. Welcome, Jerry.
Certainly.
Hi.
Pleasure.
Would you please tell us, first of all, what your occupation is, what do you do?
Yes, I'm a global account manager for Hewlett-Packard Components Group.
Mm-hmm. And how have you embraced the whole idea of learning maps?
Well, I've used learning maps for different things. I found it very useful for presentations. Mm-hmm. For instance, I have in front of me a presentation that I did a period of time ago, and it was a region review. So I centralized the talk about the region review, and I had different portions that came off, that radiated off it, and I talked about each thing in turn, and the the incredibly powerful thing that I learned about this is that after reviewing it and going through it, I can actually create a picture of this in my mind, and I can therefore go to a section and see it in my mind, what all the things I'm going to talk about, what all the key elements are, and the order I'm going to talk about it in.
Right. And I see you've used different colors as well. So how important
Right.
was that?
The different colors aren't really essential, but they do help to distinguish it a little bit better.
And how do you find this kind of learning, keeping notes, is different from the old-fashioned linear methods, I guess?
Yes. In the beginning, I really didn't see what, just by reading about it, I really didn't see what the difference was. When I actually started using it, I found that it made a tremendous difference. I found that I can visualize the sequence of events. When I made notes, I could then put another note right in the exact spot. If you did it in a linear fashion, there's no room for adding it. Everything is in a sequence of what you went through, but not necessarily in an organized way.
And this is a very important point, because for learning to become truly memorable, you actually have to implement it and put it into effect. And this is something that you've now shared with other people?
Yes, in fact, I've given these techniques to people in my group, and they've used them. Some of them are in the audience there.
Great.
And they've used them and different things as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jerry.
Okay.
We appreciate it. Okay. So there you see what learning maps are all about and how they can actually be applied into the workplace very, very effectively. It's a true way of learning, using all of our senses for learning.
So how do we actually build a learning map? Basically, we find out what the core idea is, and we put that in the center. So we build up from a core, and each subject will have a branch. And on a learning map, maybe the first branch is, what are we going to record? We're going to record ideas. So we just put a little branch for ideas. You don't record great long reams of words. You're actually recording ideas. And the ideas will be recorded in just maybe keywords, so that one word will trigger the memories and you'll remember everything else. Now, you might actually record in pictures if you're a good artist. If your brain thinks that way, you might well start drawing your whatever it is you're talking about. I've got a nice little house there. Or it could be you're drawing symbols, where you've got big arrows going from one thing to another, where it loops and joins up information, things that aren't even possible on linear maps without really getting completely lost. You might then have another section which says, well, what can we use them for? Jerry's used them for presentations. Anything that you have to write notes for. So it could be for meetings, to actually record ideas from meetings. Brainstorming is another wonderful way, because you can go back to add information later as it crops up, and yes, it's related to that, or it's related to something else. Colour is very important. The visual memory is very, very strong. And this is why learning maps work, because instead of having 6 pages of notes, you've actually got all your notes on one page, and you almost take a photograph of it with your brain. And if you're trying to learn from it, and you're redrawing a map, your brain will be looking for what's missing. So you might have, on the original one, had 3 legs, and you think, that part of the subject I've completely lost. That's where I need to do some more work, because your brain is in tune with this sort of learning. A brain cell is very much like this. You've got a center, and you've got all the connections coming out from it. So we make it as memorable as possible, and we use a lot of colour. Colour can be used to relate different parts of the information, so that you can track that the same ideas are in the same colour. It can be used, as I said, to actually relate things. So, you have these, the colour is important, and we want to colour the key words maybe. So we add the colour into the keywords. You also maybe use different sorts of lettering. I mean, on a rough map, you just go through quickly, but then part of the technique is to actually redraw your notes later, so that you organise them more. And that's all part of the memory and learning process. But, you might have something, if you're writing the word stress, you might go, and really make it look like what it's supposed to be. So you know that that's stress, or we had one on the earlier one which was relax, and it was a very laid-back lettering. They're just visual ways of making your notes come alive, and they can be so useful because you can picture what you've learned. And the old saying is, picture's worth 1,000 words. This is definitely a way that we would encourage you to try, because like Jerry said, once you've tried, you really do realise how useful they can be, and you end up using them in preference to any other method of taking notes.
So we each have a preferred individual learning style. We really have a combination of intelligences. What accelerated learning does is it helps you identify what you're good at, and it also identifies the things that maybe you want to work on, so you can embrace all of the different intelligences.
Learning must never be passive. You have to be doing something as you learn. And this chart, I think, really tells a story. On average, we only remember about 20% of what we read, 30% of what we hear, 40% of what we see, and about 50% of what we say. But the single most effective way to learn is to physically do something, to be actively involved. But that still only results in about 60% recall. However, if we can see it, if we can hear it, if we can say it, and if we can do it all together, then we can increase that recall to 90%. Multi-sensory learning really pays dividends. I remember I once asked a group from an insurance company to write down the individual processes involved in dealing with a claim. Each person held up one of the processes in front of him, and then they all positioned themselves in the correct sequence at the front of the room. It was a very powerful learning experience that they never forgot. And speaking of powerful learning experiences, what are you doing right now as an active learner? Are you making a learning map? Will you stop the video and think through what would work best for you? That's what we mean by active participation. Knowing about a subject and really understanding it are two different things. Well, if you've done a good job at stage 2, you'll certainly know about your subject. But will you really understand it? Converting data into understanding is the job of stage 3.
We're going to look now at the traits, if you like, of the 7 intelligences, and we all have a different profile of them. We all have all 7, but we just use them in a way that is unique to us. So when I pose some questions, by all means, you will be able to answer yes to more than one, because we don't just rely on one intelligence. And the first one we're looking at is the linguistic intelligence. Now, are there people here who enjoy verbal arguments or crosswords, things like that? Those are the linguistic talents, and they would certainly be using things like asking questions or rephrasing what they're learning in their own words. That would be a way of actually employing this linguistic talent. Now, for people who like figures and accounting and science, and maybe calculating the betting odds, that is a display of the mathematical intelligence, mathematical and logical. And the sort of techniques that we can use to help us use that would be to rate and categorize what we're learning, to put them into numbered lists so that we can use this affinity we have with